Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. Survival games are a dime a dozen these days. How they play, however, hasn't always remained the same. In more recent times, one could argue that the survival subgenre has relied mostly on crafting items and utilizing limited resources in order to overcome a hazardous environment. However, before the genre's popularization, one PlayStation title, released exclusively in Japan, decided to include this gameplay style in a genre that it's often not applied to: point and click. So, today, we will be looking at Aconcagua. Aconcagua was developed and published as a Sony Computer Entertainment first-party title, exclusive to Japan in the year 2000. The game takes place in the fictional country Maruza, based upon and named after a real province of Argentina called Mendoza. Maruza is in the midst of political disturbance after the results of an independence movement amongst its citizens. Maruza has been split in half politically as a result. Pachamama, a 33-year-old activist, has taken a flight as part of a tour to promote the independence movement, during which a terrorist organization detonates a bomb on the plane, causing it to crash close to Aconcagua's peak, a large, perilous mountain. Only 5 of the plane's inhabitants survive the crash, and they must all work together to survive the events that follow. The player takes on the role of Kato, a Japanese journalist who has been covering Pachamama's story. After the crash, Kato is tasked with guiding the flight's survivors down the mountain, with the help of Pachamama. As they work to escape the clutches of the harsh mountainous conditions, the terrorists continue to try to eliminate the survivors after discovering their initial plan had failed. Kato and Pachamama are joined by Steve, Julia, and Lopez. Steve is an anxious engineer with a number of great skills for survival. Julia is also a journalist like Kato, though coming from the United States. She is in pursuit of a story following the expected coup d'etat. Lopez is the last member to join the group, a hench native with great strength, capable of moving even some of the largest obstacles the team find in their way. The game plays from a third-person perspective. Players must solve various problems and puzzles alongside survival. Much like any point-and-click game, a mouse cursor is used to control the character's movements. When hovering over a character, it changes to a smiley face, indicating you can talk to them, and if the cursor changes to an exclamation mark, the player can interact with the environment. Much of the game's situations requires the player to switch between the various survivors in order to accomplish certain tasks, with each having their own particular set of special skills. Kato, he has a passion for the mountains, so his abilities tend to revolve around mountaineering. Specifically, with the use of some gloves that he finds, he is able to climb certain areas. Julia, she has knowledge of some of the bases situated in the mountain. She has a knife and a lighter, so her skills involve being able to light up certain areas, setting things alight, and is the only character who can take out guards with said knife. Steve, he finds a toolbox, and though he may be riddled with self-doubt and paranoia, he is capable of fixing most electrical devices that cause an obstacle. Pachamama, she can speak Spanish, and so she has the capability to interpret or trick guards with the language. She also uses this skill to translate any Spanish reading material found throughout the ordeal. Lopez, the last person to join the team. He is tall and strong. This is pretty much his entire skill set. Rather than just relying on their abilities to solve problems, the player must actively have characters communicate with each other to push through their struggle. By talking amongst themselves, characters can communicate more effectively, providing their opinions and suggestions on how the group might proceed, as well as discussing their current feelings. In this nature, while the player may know how they need to proceed, it is pivotal that the characters in the game are aware as well, as they will be unable to complete their tasks unless they have a logical reason to perform the action requested of them. This includes the ability to exchange items between characters that specifically suit the skill set required to use them. Though the game is fundamentally a point-and-click, the game does still have an element of linearity, not requiring the player to backtrack or obtain items for later use. Players are required to search each area for objects that can be used within that same environment to help solve problems and advance to the next area. The only items that are used throughout the entire adventure are the previously mentioned key items found near the beginning of the game. The game has also been compared to survival titles that preceded it, such as Dino Crisis, Parasite Eve, and Resident Evil, but it also seems to encompass some elements of stealth gameplay, requiring the player to sneak characters past enemies whilst they aren't looking. Each character has their own health bar, and if they are spotted by an enemy, they will be shot before returning to cover. The only way to recover health is by finding medical kits, though these are scarcely supplied. If any one character loses all of their health, it's game over, and the player must resume from their last save point. There are a number of variations on how a puzzle must be solved, some having to be completed with steps being taken in a specific order, sometimes under time constraints, and at other times, oddly, requiring the player to lose health in order to proceed. The only means of saving is by a prompt after every event in the narrative. As quite a notable feat for an original PlayStation title, the game has over 80 minutes of cinematic cutscenes. Despite the game being released exclusively in Japan, having a Japanese main character and only containing Japanese text, the game's characters speak only in English and Spanish.
This should be the Government Army Communications Facility.
Tenemos órdenes de llevarla de vuelta. Los otros sobrevivientes deben ser exterminados.
IGN claimed that the game was made as a way for Sony to enter the Argentinian video game market, an area of the world that had been almost exclusively playing games on PC. GameSpot states that the game's release was timed with the advent of the PlayStation 2 launch, in order to boost sales of the PlayStation 1 in its stead. Aconcagua's soundtrack stands out as a particularly strong element of the game's presentation, having been composed by the renowned musician Kazuhiko Toyama, famed for his work on productions such as Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, Wild Arms, and New Super Android Cutie Honey. While the country of Maruza is fictitious, a mountain by the name of Aconcagua is not. The real mountain is actually one of the highest mountains outside of Asia, being the highest in both southern and western hemispheres. Aconcagua is straight out of the gate with its unique nature, making its relative obscurity a mystery. The game follows a plot uncommon with console titles of the time, involving a logical and realistic political divide as the foundation for what would end up being an overall experience dealing with ideological differences, survival instincts, and group mentality. Because of the very harsh reality of these topics, there is little in the way of comedy or light-hearted drama. While there is, to a certain extent, typical action segments, the game makes a constant push to bring a more serious tone to the medium. Aconcagua is an early example of a slightly different push for the survival subgenre. Unlike its predecessors and more like Disaster Day of Crisis, much of the peril in the game's story revolving around real-world threats rather than typical supernatural horror antagonists. The game was set for a Western release sometime later the same year it was published in Japan, though ultimately this never came to fruition. A possible reason for this lack of localization may have been the close ties the game's plot had with these same real-world threats. The video game medium had little in the way of discussing real-world political issues before Aconcagua, and it may have been seen as a possible point of contention with the Western market. At the time, video games were largely still considered to be an escapist form of entertainment, often avoiding more realistic political discourse.
This is Chad Barnard speaking. I'll be your captain for Aero Patreon. I just need to run through some safety procedures. In case of an error 1355, please remain calm and find a way to escape. Corey Nelson will be providing in-flight entertainment, and everyone will receive a complimentary Pokemon card with their flight. Have a safe trip.
Hey Malcavio, maybe we should get an interview with the Free Master Gamers before we land.
Maybe you are right. It'll be hard to interview them when we land. Jedistotle7, sorry to disturb your rest, but we've heard you've been smuggling Mentos and Cola into Patreon land. Is it true Mike Sinistar is behind this?
Trevor Wooten and myself have done nothing. Who told you these lies, Everett Lathrop?
Guillermo Chavez.
Does Robert Cox know you're here? Excuse me. I have an important call with Vitas Varnus tomorrow and need rest.
This isn't over. Arkady Skywalker and Joshua Bock will be waiting for you at the airport. Please take my complimentary Clefairy card.
I'll let Jackie H know you're coming.
This is your captain speaking. We are going to be experiencing turbulence shortly. Please remain seated.
Hey, look outside. Is that Ken 111 on the mountain?
No, that looks more like Gary CXJK. Did your boy Beowulf tighten all the lids on the cola? Oh god, Vitas Varnus is back there.
Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Region Locked. Big shout-outs to the patrons. Without them, we wouldn't be covering games like this, since no one's heard of it, so why would people click the video? I mean, clearly you did because you're interested in these bizarre regional exclusive video games. I've got to say, graphically, I was quite impressed with this game. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.